We're approaching things a little bit differently on the show today. We're not talking about babies and family creation, but instead we're talking about the world we live in and raise our children in. I am speaking today to none other than Joanna Johnson. You may know her as Unlearn16 on social media. And we have a frank conversation about where we stand in the world, how the world is unfolding, why people may feel the way they do and therefore react the way that they react. But I won't say more. Instead, I encourage you to have a listen and learn with me. Welcome to the Becoming Baby Ready podcast, your podcast for queer family planning. My name is Sam, and throughout this podcast, you'll hear me have conversations with professionals who work alongside people who want to start and grow their families, as well as parents of intentionally created families. Everyone I speak to identifies as being part of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. This is your opportunity to learn answers to questions you didn't even know you had. Before I hit play on this particular podcast episode, I want to apologize for the sound quality of my mic. Joanna sounds amazing and her sound quality is fantastic. So please stick with listening to what I have to say under what sounds like bubbles so that you can hear the poignant, powerful comments that Joanna shares. Welcome, everyone. Today, I am chatting with someone who I didn't necessarily know I would have on the podcast, but they are a font of information, just educated, and they love to school people, not just teach, but school. I am speaking, of course, about Joanna Johnson at Unlearn16, literally everywhere. Welcome, Joanna. I'm glad to have you here.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's wonderful to have you here. And recently, I mean, everyone who listens to my podcast knows that this is really, generally speaking, a conversation that I typically have about queer family planning and creation. But that's all under the umbrella of all of us being queer and having to navigate this world from that lens, which is a world that's not generally set out to accept us, respect us, treat us with dignity and kindness. And so while I respect that you are not a parent, you have been forthcoming speaking on your own platforms about the fact that that isn't because it isn't what you wanted to do. You did seek that out. So I'm happy to talk about that today. I'd love to talk to you as well. We're recording in April 2025 because I'd like to speak to you about just what's going on in this world and where Canada sits with an election looming in a few weeks.
Absolutely. Where would you like to start? That last part?
Yeah, let's start there. Everywhere.
I think that we're in a pushback. There are waves of progress and then there's the recession, right? There are waves and then the tide goes out. And I think we are in that recession moment where let's be perfectly honest, I've been teaching for 23 years, and in those 23 years, in Canada anyways, this huge wave of progress in which gay marriage was legalized in Canada not that long ago. We're not talking about ancient history here, right? What is that, 2006? You have gay adoption being acceptable. You have people being both parents on birth certificates. You have the trans community finally getting some degree of legislative support and awareness. You have in schools, which everybody lost their minds about, right? You have in schools now this accepting of all identities throughout. So you had this incredible wave. And then what we're seeing right now is the pushback. And the pushback is coming really, really strong, obviously from the right. And I think nobody really talks about the why. They talk about the outcome. Do I want amazing human rights all over the place and everybody's human dignity to be respected? Absolutely. But do I want to understand, because I think it's important to understand why the pushback, how easily manipulated that pushback is, because I think that has value. And I think what the queer community consistently has challenged, and then the trans community as a part of that bigger entity has really pushed is the notion of what it is to fundamentally be a man or a woman. And even though feminists have pushed the gender markers, the ideas of gender, is it socially constructed, is it genetic, whatever, the trans community really has just thrown up all the puzzle pieces, right? And started, and then even more than that, the trans community has gone that road, but the non-binary community then has said, no, we don't like any of it. Screw it all.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So with this kind of functional lack of stability, and I mean that in a real sort of philosophical and academic sense. I think in a lot of ways, we've all grown up. I was born in 75. You grow up where these are the girl things, these are the boy things,
Yeah.
build you up, the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And we've all sort of assumed it to be genetic. And now very much talking about how socially controlled, manipulated, and constructed all of those things are. And we want to take them all away.
Right.
Well, listen, if you want to pull that rug, you're going to get, and we're seeing, I don't think a lot of hateful people. I think a lot of people who feel like they don't get it anymore and they feel lost and they feel like all of the things they knew and they held dear, not because they're horrible people, have
Right.
now been right out from underneath them. And um, they have this wave of a party and a group of individuals who are saying, no, that's all crap. The way you were raised was the best. They're really trying to, rather than deal with the uncertainty and deal with the lack of understanding and lack of education and lack of awareness, what they're trying to do is say, don't worry about all of that because all of that is garbage. And if all of that is garbage, we're going to take you back to a time and place in which you thought, by the way, it never existed, right? Because we could talk about the existence of the trans community going back thousands of years and the LGBTQ plus community. Um, but what they thought existed and what they thought was acceptable and what they thought were outliers. And and that is the powerful push. And
Mhm.
so that group is going to play on two things: a lack of education. And I don't mean that in a they're stupid way. I just mean ignorance is easy to manipulate. And then what they're going to do is they're going to play on your sense and your dependence on nostalgia, the good
Mhm.
old days,
Yep.
right? When I rode my bike in my neighborhood until the lights came down. By the way, that was always dangerous. Um,
We just,
that's not just today, right? Horrible things were happening to kids in the 80s. So, but it's this fictional memory that they're
mhm.
evoking as and holding it up as being the mantra. And I think that's the dangerous part.
Mhm.
And so when politicians such as Pierre Poilievre or obviously anybody down south start being anti-woke, what they're really saying is, this is a lot of change for you old folks to understand. We understand you don't like it too much. It makes you feel uncomfortable because what you thought was always just foundationally true might be on shaky ground. So you know what? We're going to wipe it all clean for you, and we're going to go back to 1982 or 1975. By the way, in the 80s, all the men in rock bands were wearing makeup, but we're going to go back to whenever it was that you thought
Yep.
these individuals didn't exist, and we're going to say that was the right time. And I think people are desperate for control and consistency in a world, by the way, the world was always uncontrolled, but
Mhm.
in a world that it feels so overwhelming now. I'm going to tap into that.
It's interesting that the way that you're saying that reminds me of when I'm teaching a prenatal class and I'm sitting talking to people, or I'm teaching a parenting class, working with a family, and we're talking about the way that the parents are doing things now, and how often people say to me, my parents say, well, we did this for you and that turned out okay.
Yeah.
And 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 having the conversation with them and reminding them to pull themselves back a bit and think about their parents and how much change is happening for their parents at the same time and how overwhelming. So they are making their snarky comments or what feels to be a snarky dig
Mhm.
when really they're just feeling uncertain about their place in the new dynamic of
There it
life,
is. There it
right?
is. I think it really is. And I know that there's a lot of hate that we're seeing, but I truly believe the hate is magnified to a level of insanity because that makes money. So I don't think there is even close to that much hate. What I think there is feeling excluded, feeling uncertain, and being ignorant. Those things are much more. I look at the United States elections, and you have 77 million voting for Trump, 72 million voting for Harris, and 90 million staying at home. I think the 90 million are the much more interesting, powerful number that we should be focused on. Ontario just had an election where we saw what happened when people don't vote in the United States. And in Ontario, 43%. What?
Yeah.
43%. And whether you like or dislike Doug Ford, I don't care. The point of the matter is that the majority of people in Ontario either thought their vote doesn't matter, the politicians are lying anyways, and we feel completely alienated from what's going to happen. That's the important part.
Mhm.
And then when you talk about issues like gender, when you talk about issues of sexuality or identity, where people like to say the words identity politics like they're a four-letter word, hilariously enough, the other side has no problems playing identity politics when they say men are this and women are with. I'm like, is that identity politics?
Yeah.
Did you just, you're just saying that's the only identity that matters because you think it's immutable, right? Because of
Mhm.
the parts that you possibly have. And that I find that fascinating. And I also find it fascinating that, and I, there needs to be better spaces for this. Um, the way that we exist in the world, there's a quote, I'm going to give you a high school quote for a second. One of my favorite quotes, and it's kind of confusing. I'm not what I think I am. I'm not what you think I am. I'm what I think you think I am. So not
Okay.
what you think I am, because I'm not in your head,
Hmm.
right? Ask who the bell tolls for. I'm not what I think I am, because people don't live in vacuums. The notion that somebody's identity is somehow, isolated from the world, from their parents, from the media, from their friends, is stupid. So what we wander around in this world thinking a lot of the times is we're trying to assess constantly what I think you think about me, right? So it's this constant interplay of me walking in this world and the way my identity gets formed. And anybody that says otherwise, again, is just being reductionist. My identity, it's the morning announcements here at Metro Prep. You should leave this in. Today after school, there's a drama rehearsal. I think my identity very much gets formed by the culture, by the society, by the time in which I live. And pretending as though that's not true is the problem. And that's why a lot of intersectionality freaks people out too, right? When they say, okay, well, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. I feel like when I talk about intersectionality, it's the opposite of identity politics. Because what
Mhm.
it's doing is acknowledging the multiverse that creates you. I didn't mean to give an end game reference. Um, but I think all of these things go into who you are. But to deny that our skin color impacts who we are is silly. To deny that the way our sexuality is presented, not necessarily our sexuality, right? Because you and I could be walking in the same space. We are going to get very different reactions and very different assumptions and stereotypes placed upon us because of the way we look, having no idea of who we are, who we love, what our lives look like, right? So to pretend as though that doesn't inform on who we are is also ridiculous. So all of these things need to be discussed. Here's what I think the left, I don't think they made a mistake. I just think this was how progress work. We give the right and then we talk about it later. I think that's what we did. Not to say that, God, the LGBTQ and this community, the queer community's been fighting for their rights forever. I'm not saying, but they've been fighting for it from a very liberal standpoint, meaning what the law should be. There's
Yeah.
a legal fight, and then there's a cultural shift and a societal fight. Well, now we're in that part,
Yeah.
right? And we need to have more conversations, not fewer conversations. We need to engage in more, not necessarily debate, but explanation of individual identity rather than trying to negate it and pretend as though it just doesn't exist, or as the right loves to talk about, how it's a somehow a mental illness or something like that. Um, that's where we dropped the ball. We just said, well, they all have rights. We all have rights. We're all going
Mhm.
to be equal. But the funny part is, we throw around this term equal, and we can't be equal. We can't be equal because we're all different. If we're all different, there needs to be equity implied in there, not equality. Treating men and women equally sounds dumb because women, people with uteruses can produce and give birth to a baby. And you're going to tell me that jobs should treat people that do that and people that don't do that equally? Well, that doesn't make any sense because when somebody takes off a year for parental leave and I'm an employer, do I have to decide, well, parental leave, but they're never going to be really back here again, to be honest. Once you're a parent, everything shifts. And sometimes, a lot of the times, that weight or that burden tends to reside on the shoulders of one partner over the other. And statistically, we're talking about resides on women more than men. So
Right.
we wonder why women don't get promoted. Well, I'll tell you why. Because at 31 years old, and I'm a lawyer, I'm doing exceedingly well. I should be getting a partnership deal at any given moment. They're deciding and judging, am I going to get pregnant? And if she gets pregnant, how long is she going to take off? And once she takes off that time in order, and that takes away from the firm, every ear infection and dance recital, is she going to be away from work?
Mhm.
Because men aren't, again, I'm talking statistically, men aren't taking that same time off. So if I'm a betting person at a law firm and I see two relatively equal, the woman could even be a little bit better. I'm betting on the guy. And this is that subtle form of sexism and misogyny and again transphobia, if we're dealing with that community, that we don't talk about it because nobody's talking about it.
Right. Yeah. And if we give voice to it, then we're giving it power or something like that instead
Well,
of trying to learn through
you
it.
have to. It has to be constantly negotiated and renegotiated and talked about because it's complicated. What the
Mhm.
right also really wants to do is simplify the world because it
Mm.
makes the rest of us feel better. Just
Right.
tell me what to do. Tell me what to do to get the house and the kids and the interest rate. Just tell me. Tell me what I need to do. And when you can tell me what I need to do, then I can just follow this plan, right? And the right loves to simplify. That's why they come up with such good taglines like Make America Great Again or Axe the Tax. Simple. But
Mm.
nothing in this world is simple. So when the left says, whoa, 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 we need to have a big conversation about it, in this day and age, there's two problems. Number one, our attention span is non-existent. Number two, we don't want to expand it. We just want you to tell us what to do.
Right.
Simplify it.
We say we want you to.
You say you want to explain it, but can
Yeah.
you do it in under 30 seconds and just put a pin in it so I know exactly what to do to get by it? And we have a world, and I don't think anybody's really given, I'm sure some people have weight to the power and the implications of the internet. It being able to search up anything I ever want on my phone and having constant contact with news and just breaking, this breaking, like to be constantly inundated with that. And I know it's kind of our choice, but it kind of isn't because even if you put away your phone, everybody in the hall of your work or your school or your bus stop, they're
Mhm.
all talking about it anyway. To be
Yep.
constantly inundated with that and know what's going on everywhere all the time, and how chaotic it is making us feel chaotic. And
Hmm.
again, now we flash back to when I was a kid in 1982 and nothing was chaotic. I'll tell you the reason. Nothing was chaotic, A, because you only had one newspaper in the 6 o'clock news. So you only had micro insulated stress, but also you were young, stupid, and naive. You didn't
Right.
know. Of course, it
Yeah.
felt better then. I
Right.
was right. And so that's what the
Yeah.
danger of nostalgia is, the false memory of what it was and the lack of awareness in a time in which we didn't have awareness or significant awareness.
That's so true. That's and the age that people are being exposed, to that constant barrage is younger and
Absolutely.
younger and younger all the time. Like I honestly, I know for myself during COVID, we stopped turning on the news. We stopped turning on like scrolling and we would make sure that our feeds were being flushed from constant reminders of what the trauma was
Hmm.
because news stations were saying, stay with us. We'll be right back. We'll give you the latest. And everybody felt like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I need to be right there. I need to be right back.
Hmm.
And so we turned it all off. But like you say, I mean, when I was at work and we'd have patients come in and they'd be telling me what was said anyway. So it's not like
Somebody's talking about it somewhere.
oh, I didn't get away from it as
Hmm.
much as I just didn't direct expose myself to the voices that I
Well, then
relate.
there's the problem too, right? Now you're hearing it secondhand from whatever echo chamber they live in, and now you're giving up power. If you're going to say, I'm not going to go on the news, or I'm not going to scroll, or I'm not going to do my own kind of investigation, then I'm at the whim of
Hmm.
whoever happens to be in my world filling my ear.
Hmm.
And obviously that's not going to stop anytime in the near future, right? And it is constant. It's interesting because I think that it's that and that consistency of information overload is what the is what the right is playing on. It's how Trump won.
Hmm.
It's exactly how he won by playing on the fact that don't worry, I got everything on lock. And not that people are so horrible and bigoted, but I think people are so desperate as to wanting to believe somebody knows how the hell to right this ship,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And again, the 90 million people that stayed home or the, whatever, 57% of Ontario that stayed home, these people are just checked out.
Yeah.
Or there are some people that couldn't make it to polls and due to jobs and those kinds of things, but let's assume there's a pretty good chunk who just decided, I'm not going to make time on that day, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to make time on that day. That's a huge number. And that's a number that we should be speaking about more, right?
Do you think that those are younger people, or do you think they're older people? Like, or do you think it's a broad spectrum of
I think
people
it's
of
a
all
broad
ages?
spectrum. I don't think kids, you got to know that this is the only, like the Trump, the right, the Andrew Tate, this is the only world they know.
Sure.
They don't have any other comparisons. They have stories that their dad tells. Like they don't have any direct comparisons. I would say that the individuals sort of that have been around, let's say from you know what I've been watching a lot of lately is Newsroom. And Newsroom was very much focused on the rise of the Tea Party in the Republican Party and how
Mhm.
they were this pretense of a grassroots, real Republican Party, people of the people. We the people, right? But
Mhm.
secretly they were supported and they were fully funded by the Koch brothers. I think MAGA is just the new Tea Party. They got rid of the Koch brothers in secret and they put Elon Musk out in front, but it's the same mandate.
Mhm.
It's the same idea. And everybody talks about fairness in journalism and objectivity in journalism, but those are two very different things. Fairness
Yeah.
would be talking equally about what Donald Trump says and about what scientists say. Objectivity would stipulate we're not even giving this man a minute of time because he has nothing objective, nothing of truth, right?
Right.
He's built an empire of conspiracies along with a lot of people around him.
Right.
So we have this illusion of what the media is supposed to be. And if the media is supposed to be objective and true, we're missing, or we're definitely missing a perspective when we start talking about objective and true is not balanced of opinion. Those are two different things,
Sure,
right?
sure.
We shouldn't be giving a second of time to anybody that says the earth is flat. No, 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 no. An objective reality stipulates you don't get to have the microphone. We don't
Right.
live there now, right? The
Mhm.
left has been like, oh, well, we have to be balanced. No, no, I don't think so. We have to be truthful.
Right. And I think that that's where even on the left we split the vote so
Sure.
much because we're divi we're taking things from one extreme side of the left to the other, and
Mhm.
then we end up being this divided group where if we sat down together and talked, we'd realize that fundamentally, for the most part, our thoughts, our hopes, our wishes for the way that the world could function is fairly similar.
Sure.
How we get to that is going to be different. But
Yeah. And I
for
mean, in Canada, we've split the vote with the left between three major parties.
mhm,
Three, because I
yeah,
include the Bloc Québécois because they're in Quebec and they split that vote. So you have Liberals, NDP, and the Bloc if you're in Quebec. They are all left-leaning parties to different degrees.
mhm,
If those three parties solidified and we had a two-party system, the Conservatives would never win in Canada, ever. But
no,
we constantly split that vote. Want to know why we split that vote? Because on the left, we want to have the discussion. We understand that truth and getting to reality is nuanced and it's a big conversation. And since it's a big conversation, we're not interested in simple memes and taglines. We want to have the discussion. We want more people at the table. More people at the table mean a diversity or a splitting of how we're going to vote for those people. Unfortunately, rather than it strengthening one side, it weakens that. Hilariously enough, democracy in that capacity is weakening one side more than the other.
absolutely. In actual fact, I think by splitting the vote, we only strengthen the right. We
Yeah.
want to strengthen the left, but we only
Yes.
strengthen the right.
Absolutely. And then we start talking about strategic voting. A lot of people are talking about how Jagmeet Singh and the federal NDPs are taking hits in polls. I said, it's not because everybody hates Jagmeet all of a sudden. It's
Yeah.
because people are like, we have to be on the left. We have to beat Pierre Poilievre. We have to beat Pierre Poilievre. Cool. I'm switching my NDP vote to a liberal vote to empower the guy that looks like, according to polls, statistically can take him head on. So we're going to offshoot that. So it again ends up being less democratic,
Right.
right? Because we're starting to make, as soon as you make a strategic vote, that's not necessarily democracy in action. That's couching your bets. Um, but the right doesn't have to do that. And we saw this as a problem when the right had the Reform Party splinter off, and then they had the conservative, the Alliance or whatever the heck they were called. Remember when
Oh, yeah.
Stockwell Day rode in on that? That's a moment in media history in a wetsuit. That was brilliant for the left,
That I never need to see again.
right? And it was only at their re-solidification that Stephen Harper
Yeah.
takes the government. But all of these things, I mean, when we really boil it down to, because a lot of people think people vote with intelligence and
Mhm.
awareness. And I don't mean to undermine people's intelligence. I'll just speak about me. Understanding the carbon tax is perhaps the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I consider myself relatively educated. But
Mhm.
understanding economic theory and trade deficits and carbon tax and the European Union and what they require in order for us to join and what the rebates look like and how much businesses are getting taxed and what the payoff is. To be educated and vote on those issues, you need to stop working and get a degree in economics and international trade. So what do? Well, so we're pulled into the cultural warfare. And then we're just guided by whatever makes us feel good, safe, and secure. Not truth, rationality, and intelligence. Safe, secure, consistent. And that's what we're drawn by. And I think back, I mean, Ben Mulrooney's son is just every 5 seconds tweeting stupidity because Brian Mulroney was actually, even though he started NAFTA, so we can all fight about that, and he kind of snuck it through, he was considered a red Tory. This is a man who also tried to put unions in the Constitution, right? That was in the Charlottetown Accord. He tried to include Indigenous people and rights into our Constitution. A conservative,
Mhm.
right? Those conservatives don't exist anymore. You had Diefenbaker in 1960 create the Bill of Rights for the first time that anybody's seen it in Canada, not into the Constitution because he didn't have that power. And then he made choices, and I don't need to get into economic policy, but he made very, very smart economic choices about where Canadian dollar sat, and he got bounced out. Why? Not because it wasn't the smart choice and didn't make sense for Canada's economy, but because the average Canadian didn't understand why their dollar was worth less when they went to the United States to go buy stuff. And they didn't like it.
Right.
They didn't like it. They wanted our dollar to be stronger. Well, our dollar's stronger. We have less investment from the United States. We're a small country. We need that. We rely on that for our country to be functional. But the
Hmm.
average Canadian didn't like the instantaneous thing because they didn't have the education,
Right. And
right? So I think
yeah.
everything we're dealing with right now, and when it comes to the LGBT, I know it's a very long acronym. See, I also have a problem here. Guys, can we just come up with something simpler?
Mhm.
I know. You pick a word. I don't know what it is, but that this acronym, um, I love that it's inclusive, but it's also like getting to a point where I can't remember all the letters. And we are distinguishing ourselves. Speaking of splitting the vote, we are distinguishing ourselves to such a microscopic level that it is easy for predators within the same system to pick us off one by one. And you know this, and I know this. This community that we speak of has not ever been a solidified, supportive community for all members in it.
Not at all.
There we go. You want to know why? Well, because the first thing you do as soon as you have a ruling power is you divide and conquer. You pit one against the other. And
Hmm.
if they're fighting amongst themselves, they're not fighting the powers that be. And we're still in that right now, I think.
100%. Yeah,
Right?
100%. Yeah, I see it all the time and I hear it from people all the time. But you're right. It is it is a conversation my wife and I have on a regular basis because I am comfortable using the 2S LGBTQIA plus
Look at
acronym
you.
because I because I say it all the time.
Sure, sure.
But why can't we just say, I don't know, LGBT or queer or something that's short and simple that encompasses everybody? Because if we want people to look at us and respect us and treat us with the kindness and dignity and acceptance that we deserve, then if we keep splitting ourselves up and then pitting ourselves against one another within the same community, then we're just asking for people to look at us and treat us differently.
Well, we're making it easier anyway, right?
Sure,
Making it
sure.
easier to do so. But it's funny, the more we really split ourselves apart, and this is kind of interesting, the more it comes to a head that identity and the way that we want to identify and how we want to be, we can keep going down this list of acronyms. What it's going to get to is an individualized way of identifying that belongs to no group specifically, but many groups consistently, right? Again, it's the whole intersectionality.
Yep.
So, and if that's the case, which I do agree, the reality, the need for the group is essential before I can have individual respect. If I don't have a group to align myself with, nobody's ever going to listen. The laws are never going to change. Everybody's going to treat me with crap. Numbers matter. But
Sure.
as those numbers matter and we change the law, we need to be able to be identified and stand individually. That's how you know you live in a free and democratic society. Can I stand completely by myself and be completely who I am as long as I'm not hurting anybody else and be respected and treated equitably and fairly in this society? That's the test. We're no close to that, right?
Right.
That's why you need Black Lives Matter. That's why you need groups fighting against
Yeah.
genocide. That's why you need all of this stuff because numbers are the only things that shift the needle. But when it comes to people, we're all very different, right?
Right.
We're all very different and very unique, right? And I think again, when you really say it like that too, people don't like it. People like, oh yeah, but I like grouping people because if I can group people, I understand it. I know what's coming at me,
Right.
right?
Yeah. But do you understand it? That's, I
Yeah,
mean,
no.
that's probably not
It's
the case.
but that's the best part. To understand somebody fully is near impossible because understanding ourselves is a progress, is a lifetime endeavor. So
Right.
if it's a lifetime endeavor for me to understand me, how the hell can anybody else even come close? Well, the answer is they can't, but that's why we establish these laws and social constructs in order to ensure that you have the best shot possible to have the same freedom and the same support and the same access as everybody else in this life.
Sure. So what do we tell the young people now that this is their first election, first federal election? They want to preserve what they have grown up believing Canada to be. How do we talk to them? What do we say to them?
I think kids nowadays grow up in sure, they grow up in Canada, but they grow up very, very aware of the world and
Hmm.
very aware of what the world's doing. So I think we say to them, um, you know, become educated,
Hmm.
and I'm not just saying stay in school, although, yay, stay in school, but I'm saying you have access to information, to people, to travel, to experience that nobody else prior to your generation has ever had. You
Hmm.
have the ability to become more aware and more intelligent than any previous um, generation before you. Stop wasting it on Snapchat. And to vote with what you want to see happen, not with what you hope for, what you demand, what you believe is truly about human dignity and rights. Because I'm telling you, you have young teenagers, they know exactly what it is. The only reason it shifts because they think they come up against the reality of a crappy system. And so then they downplay what they think they can expect and demand. I call bullcrap on that. We create this whole reality we have right
Yeah.
now, we created it. Money was created because we said so. Buildings exist because we built them. Educational systems exist because we created the foundations of the structure of the educational system. It all can be changed. Don't you dare rest on the predecessors' perceptions and realities and limitations because you don't have to have those.
Right.
And then vote, and then vote.
Yeah. And I think that that's the biggest. No, you can't stay home. The biggest thing for everyone is that they need to vote. Apathy doesn't help anybody.
Yep, absolutely.
I recognize you. I'm speaking to you while you're at work, and I won't take up a whole lot more of your time. I really appreciate you taking the time because I mean this is an important enough issue that I needed to completely change my whole thought process for my podcast to be able to give voice to you who who everyone that follows you, and you've got an extremely substantial following online. So I'm not saying something that you're not familiar with, but people gravitate towards the way that you present the information that they want to learn. They
Hmm.
wouldn't be following you. I mean, some of them follow you, I think, so that they can give you content and fodder for upcoming
And I love
different,
those people. Yeah.
right, right.
Keep spelling things wrong, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. But I do think that, I mean, people are following you because you present things in a way that make it accessible for them to learn. And they obviously want to learn or they wouldn't
Hmm.
be following you and listening to what you have to say.
And I
So,
think I sort of lucked out in the sense that people really want to talk about these issues, but they don't want to talk about them like the weight of the world's on their shoulders. They want to be able to laugh. They want a little bit of sarcasm. They want occasionally to watch me overspend at Yorkdale Mall. But I think that's essential,
Yeah.
right? And I think um, we can talk about important issues. We always should talk about important issues, but we don't have to negate laughing and poking fun and levels of levity in the middle, in the midst of all this, because that's what life is supposed to feel like,
Mhm.
right? That's why I don't just do a politics channel.
Yeah.
Well, because I can't. I don't want to. And that's not how you live life. It's
No,
just not, right?
no.
So every different expression. I'm very much an old school feminist in the personal is political. Everything we do and every way we act is a political action. What we buy, how we buy it, the people we choose to hang out with, the people we put in our inner circle, the schools we go to, those are all political actions. Um, but it doesn't mean that you always have to be serious when engaging in them. You just have to recognize they all have weight.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's
Of course. Thank you for inviting me.
been great.
I appreciate it.
As a queer individual with colonial lineage, I want to first acknowledge the land upon which I live and work. Being from what is now known as Burlington, Ontario, I recognize the original ancestry of these lands as they span from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment and beyond. These lands are steeped in Indigenous history that benefits my community every day. The territory is mutually covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I stand is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. The land dictates everything about our ways of being. Particularly, the land teaches us about fluidity. Concepts of the binary system and heteropatriarchy were imposed by the colonials who were, at the same time, removing children from their homes, families, and all that was familiar to them. These same children were divided by the only two prescribed binaries recognized by the settlers, and they were forced to conform to a performative, gendered falsehood. The land doesn't operate under binary thinking. It is diverse, complex, and unpredictable at times. Rather, the land holds us and all of our remarkable pasts and identities. Every organism and spirit has a purpose. It is from this understanding that I strive to live and grow. Thank you for joining me today on the Becoming babyREADY podcast. If you have a story that you'd like to share, or you know someone who might, if you're a professional who works in the capacity of helping people start and grow their families, and you identify as being a part of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community yourself, then please don't hesitate to reach out. We always have room for more stories to share, and there's always more learning to do.